everyone, and welcome to episode 38 of the Retrospectives podcast. My name is Patrick Arthur, and I'm joined, as always, by my co-host, James Turlings. How are you tonight, James?
Going good, Patrick. Excited for what's hopefully going to be a real fiery episode.
I expect this to be a very painful episode, although in some sense it'll be cathartic, because I finally get to release my opinion on this game in a holistic way. And I've been wanting to do that for quite some time now. We are, of course, the Retrospectives podcast. Each and every fortnight, James and I, and occasionally a guest, will play through a classic game of the past from start to finish, with the single intention of letting you guys know if that game is still worth playing today. James and I are not interested in how good a game was on release. We're not interested in the context in which it was produced. We simply want to know, how good is this game today? Is it a classic that has truly stood the test of time? And this fortnight, we're playing the JRPG called Lunar Silver Star Story Complete. Now, before we get into the discussion, the first thing I want to do is give a big shout out to another podcast that had James and I on for an interview, Will and Drew's Gaming Retrospective, or WDGR podcast. They had us on for a two-part interview where James and I got to gas bag about a lot of stuff, including our gaming histories and, of course, Dark Souls. So big shout out to Will and Drew for having us on. It was an absolute delight, and it was really enjoyable getting to talk about ourselves and not talk about retro
old games. Yeah, exactly. I had a lot of fun on the show. Will and Drew are both great guys. I really enjoyed being on their show, and as Patrick said, being able to talk about a topic or topics other than the old games was really quite cathartic.
Yeah, so we highly recommend you go check that out. We'll pop a link to the comments and check out all of their other content. Will and Drew are middle-aged gamers, and they have to face the trials and tribulations of juggling full-time work with jobs. Something that James and I, unfortunately, both fully appreciate now. So it's a great interview, and they do great stuff. So highly recommend checking them out. So, as I said, the game we're doing this fortnight is Lunar Silver Star Story Complete. It's a JRPG that was made by Game Arts. Interestingly, this is a game that is a remake of a SEGA CD game called Lunar the Silver Star. And the original game was 1992, and this remake that we're playing is one of several remakes. There are 3 or 4 different remakes.
Yeah, there's about 4 of them, isn't there? It's a bit crazy. I'd never heard of this game until I was doing a lot of research for a longer title that we wanted to do, and spent a little while trying to figure out which fucking version of this game we should play, but the online consensus, and after watching the gameplay, settled on the PS1 version of the game. Apparently it has the best translation, and it definitely has the best graphics from my opinion. I showed Patrick a video of the PSP version earlier, and he was not impressed.
It was pretty atrocious. It's worth noting that there are significant changes between the 1992 game and this one we played, which was released in 98 in Japan and 99 in the US. The original is easier. The original has random encounters, while on this one there are sprites representing the enemies in the dungeons. There are translation differences between the versions, and there is a significantly expanded plot and, character moments throughout. So it isn't just a lazy remaster. It is I guess it's not quite RE2 level remake, but it's halfway there. It has significant gameplay differences.
My recommendation, based on a little bit of research and digging around online, is to play the PS1 version of this game if you're going to play it. But apparently the original is pretty comparable too. I hear that there's actually a version on iPhone as well. I hear it's okay, but yeah, that and the PSP version online, the consensus is that they're a step down from this and the original.
Now, of course, James and I do not actually own PlayStation 1s, so we were very naughty, and as we often are, and played on an emulator. We played on EPSXE. And just worth noting that I didn't encounter any serious issues with this game whatsoever. I had the occasional graphical problem with, I guess, identifiable lines appearing at the edge of blocks, but it kind of disappeared as I moved into the halfway point in the game. So I don't know if you had any issues, Jimmy.
No, I didn't see anything like that. It ran perfectly for me the entire time. There was sorry, just to note, there was a few settings we had to enable in the config to fix a bunch of specific issues that this game has, but once that, I'll link that in the show note description, and once we turn that on, worked flawlessly.
Yeah, we'll pop a link on our website. So if you just go to the website page, we'll have a screenshot of that so you can check it out there. Well, James, I believe it is time for us to begin discussion of this game. A game that you and I have had thinly veiled remarks indicating our feelings over the past 4 weeks, and a game that I have complained to my other friends nonstop because I wasn't able to explain to you properly. So what I think we'll do is we'll give you a little bit of a premise of this game, just a very simple premise. We'll get into some non-spoilery story discussion, although there's going to be a little bit. So
There's going to be a little bit, yeah.
If you really want to enjoy this game with absolute zero spoilers, we advise skipping ahead a little bit. But we're just going to go into the first, few hours of the game. So this should just give you an impression on how the general story progresses. So the premise of this game and the way this game starts, and I'm going to do my best to remain unbiased in the description of this premise, but I will say that in describing this premise to some of my friends, not only could I not keep a straight face describing it, they also burst into laughter. So the game opens with Alex, a young boy in a rural town, at the edge of a cliff, at the graveyard of a great hero who used to be called a Dragon Master. And Alex wants to be a hero called a Dragon Master. In fact, he says something to the effect of, I enjoy my rural country life, but one day I wonder, will I ever go on an adventure like this Dragon Master? So he's sitting there at the grave, wondering about becoming a hero. And then, I kid you not, a flying, talking cat approaches him. It says, I knew you would be up here. You really love this Dragon Master, and you always come here when you want to reminisce on being a hero. So Alex wants to be a hero. That's the very starting premise. And Alex has a couple of friends in this village, and they go on a little adventure. And this story, I guess, is about Alex's little adventures becoming grander and grander adventures over time as he pursues his goal of becoming a Dragon Master, whatever the hell that happens to be. James, have I been unfair in describing my premise, or would you say I'm bang on the money?
It's pretty accurate, honestly. The setup for this game is quite, generic, to say the least. It's not gonna blow you away by any stretch of the mean, but I definitely didn't find it as offensive as you seem to have.
I mean, it's just literally the most generic tripe that could possibly be shoved down your throat. When I say that I can't keep a straight face describing this, it's because I can't imagine a more boring way to set up your hero than he wants to be a generic hero. That is his drive. That is the central conflict of his character. He wants to be a generic hero. There's nothing really connecting him to this hero. There's nothing bad in his past that's happened. There's nothing about, his character that draws attention apart from the fact that he wants to be a Dragon Master. And what the hell is a Dragon Master? Even the rather mediocre series Aragon does a far better job setting up the role of dragon riders in the society than this does. It just says that Dragon Masters and Dragon Masters are cool without ever explaining what the hell they are at all. They just seem to be a hero sort of dude. I don't know if you got...
Well, a Dragon Master is very clearly somebody who has passed all of the 4 dragon trials, as you are told many times throughout the story. It is a pretty, generic hero title, and we've definitely moved on in writing far beyond this in recent years, although... To be fair, the initial driving motivation for the characters going on their first adventure isn't actually in pursuit of becoming the Dragon Master. It's actually in pursuit of a much more believable goal of making money. Shortly after Alex is on the hilltop looking out over the world and dreaming of going on adventure, he is approached by his friend Ramus, who comes excitedly up to him with a brilliant idea to become rich and famous. It's Ramus's idea that you are both going to sneak into the White Dragon's cave to steal a dragon diamond, which you can then travel to the richest city in the world and sell for billions of dollars. I think this was a much more palatable reason to go on the adventure than just like nebulously wandering off in pursuit of becoming some ancient hero.
Yeah, and it's fine. Like he's going with his friends. I mean, you do have the issue that a couple of 15-year-old kids with no combat training in their lives will have to fight through a cave full of monsters in order to,
I mean,
get
Alex
this
has
thing.
clearly been training with the sword for a long time based on,
Training against what?
I don't know, it doesn't tell you.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
in fact, when he goes to speak to his parents, they say, ah, well, I guess it was inevitable you went on your first adventure, killing hundreds of monsters in caves. So here you go. Here's a dagger. Go for it. I mean, at least in a game like Pokemon, it's not the trainers themselves that are doing battle, it's the creatures that are doing it. And I mean, I get that it's a game, but it is kind of stupid. So it's a fine thing, but already the game initially sets itself up as something ridiculous and childish from the get go.
Yeah, I mean, it's like a classic hero's journey tale, right? About, some kid in a boring town wanting to go off on an adventure. This is something that's been, in writing and games and media for, as long as people have existed.
I would say the distinguishing thing is, though, that the kids are acting almost entirely on their own merits, whereas I'd say, like in Aragon, for example, or even the series I despise and have brought up many times as one I don't like is Wheel of Time. The kids are escorted by adults, and the adults are the ones who are actually in charge. So
Yeah, and I actually like that more
it
because
makes
it
sense,
kind of
right?
like it's more so no, I like the way they did it here more is what I'm saying
Okay.
because in those media it feels like the kids are just being dragged around by these other characters. They don't have any agency over their own destiny, whereas here the characters always are in control of their decisions. They're always doing things because they want to, like they're sneaking out of town under their parents' noses to go steal a dragon diamond, whatever that is. And I found that to be, it made the characters seem more likable to me compared to, just them being dragged along by circumstance.
So, broadly speaking, I far prefer my characters to have agency, but only when it makes sense for them to have agency. And I don't think it really makes sense for these kids to have agency because they're just kids who haven't done anything. The reason the Wheel of Time has the kids dragged around is because they're dumb kids. And then as time goes on and they gradually level up, as it were, and they get opportunities to do little fights, they come into their own and they become more powerful. But it doesn't make a whole lot of sense for them to be gain the agency immediately. That being said, I don't want to dwell on this because this is just one small problem among many, and we have a lot to go through, don't we, James?
If you say so, Patrick. Well, let's not dwell on the beginning any longer. Let's jump right into the first adventure of the three main heroes, Alex, Lunar, and Ramus. And their adventure off into the Dragon Cave, begins pretty normally. They leave their village and they go wandering over the overworld map. This is a older JRPG, and they often had these overworld maps to kind of give a sense of immersion before you got to a new location. And you get to the Dragon Cave, and then you get in there and you start fighting some monsters. So, do you want to give a quick overview of the basic combat in this game?
Yeah, I mean, for those who have never played this style of JRPG before, the idea is that you have your characters standing on one side of the screen and the monsters standing on the other. You trigger a combat encounter by an enemy running into you on the dungeon screen. Some of them will be faster than you and will always catch up to you, while you can duck and weave and dodge some of the enemy sprites to avoid combats. It's turn-based combat, so what you do is you give your party commands to either attack, defend, use an item, or use a magic spell. They can only take one action. You make commands for all three of your party members, and then the combat plays out with your three party members and all the monsters doing their one action. And an attack will often attack two or three times as you move into the later stages, but it's still a single attack. and the order in which they go is determined by their speed stat. So often your caster members will be a lot slower than your combat members, which means that the monsters will often go somewhere in between you. That's the basic premise of the combat.
Yeah, so compared to a lot of other JRPGs, the characters don't stay static on either side of the screen. Like, if you select attack with your melee hero on an enemy on the other side of the screen, they will try to run up to them and then hit them. And if if their range isn't long enough, or speed, they won't be able to get there, and they'll stop in place without attacking. So, as a battle goes on, you'll generally find that both you and the monsters end up in very different parts of the screen than they started in. There's no, hitting and then running back to the beginning, with the exception of a few special attacks.
And there's also a grid that you can set your members up. That being said, I mean, you just put them in an X shape and leave them there the entire game. So
Yeah.
it's not super relevant. There are a couple of other combat options. You can get the AI to make your moves for you, which is a terrible idea. They just use all your powerful attacks on weak enemies. So I tried it a couple of times. It sucks.
You can actually program a bunch of basic routines into them. I didn't really do it because I preferred just having full control. But if you don't trust the AI, I don't know why you would. As Patrick said, it's fucking awful. Just you can set up some macros and have them do some basic actions if you're feeling lazy.
Yeah, and there's some preset macros like everyone attack. So you don't have to go through, 4 members and say, this guy attack, this guy attack, this guy attack. The vast majority of the time, you'll just be commanding each one individually. So it'll be very familiar to anyone who's ever experienced a JRPG before. It's pretty much a cookie cutter experience.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that I thought made this game stand out a little, not stand out, but one of the main conceits of the combat was that throughout your adventure in a single dungeon, your health and mana doesn't regenerate after the end of each battle, and it's actually quite beneficial to the player to try and be as mana efficient as possible, because running out probably means having to leave the dungeon and come back and respawning all the enemies. So, oftentimes you'll get into a battle and you'll be thinking, you could spend a lot of mana to kind of kill enemies quickly, or you can, try and do some basic, just sword swings to save it a bit. There's a little bit of cost-benefit analysis going on there. Maybe spending a bit of mana here will save you mana later because something won't get a hit on your party members. So I found a lot of the earlier dungeons were really about trying to get to the end of them.
All right, let's get into number 1 discussion. Why do you think this is a good thing and not terrible?
What do you mean?
Okay, so why is it enjoyable to manage your HP and mana in this fashion? What is enjoyable about not using abilities early on, only to use them elsewhere, or having lots of mana restoration items and using them between fights? What's fun about this? Because my experience with this mana and HP management is that if you ran out of HP and mana, you would go to the beginning, you'd heal up, and your party would be stronger this time. So you'd mow through the enemies a lot faster and you'd get through the dungeon anyway. So
Really?
I just
Okay.
want to know what's interesting about this process to you, because it's not a question of what is the best attack to use in a given spot. The entire game becomes about looking at how much mana and HP you have left, which is utterly dull and uninteresting to me.
Really? I think it's way more interesting than just spamming your strongest attacks every single battle for, the entire dungeon. You said, did you often get out of mana? Because I think I only went back to town once in the entire game, once I'd kind of clued into the fact that it was really valuable.
No, I didn't, because what I did was I'd get my melee guys to attack with their swords, which was still fairly effective as opposed to their magic attacks, which were overpowered. And your magic users, your healer and your casters tended to have so much mana that you didn't run out anyway, and you'd only need 1 or 2 mana restoration items to get it. So with that being said, I don't really see what's interesting about it. You did your big AoE attacks to kill things, and you just move through the dungeon. It wasn't engaging my brain in any way, shape, or form to decide, I've got half mana, I'm going to use my guys to attack with their swords instead of using this AoE attack. It's not particularly interesting to me. I don't know why you think it's a distinguishing feature of this game.
I think in a lot of other games, it's a lot easier to have full HP and mana the entire game. A lot of other JRPGs give you like an overabundance of mana restoratives, whereas in this game, they're actually, at least to begin with, quite hard to get and quite expensive. Near the end of the game, you can amass quite a few if you've got enough gold. But to begin with, the game really emphasizes this idea that each battle's a puzzle that can be figured out in a couple of different ways. You've got the mana efficient route, and the all out attack way. And I actually really enjoyed it for the most part, trying to get to the end of each dungeon without running out of mana. Because once you do get to the boss, you're going to need a lot to beat it usually.
Yeah, so I just found it completely dull and uninteresting. And I think that the way this entire game is set up is fundamentally flawed. Because, like I said, when you level up, your stats go up and your relative strength against the monsters goes up a lot. Like, even a single level can make you much stronger.
Yeah, it's great.
Even if you've leveled up twice over the course of a dungeon, enemies that would previously take, I guess, 3 rounds of combat only take 2 rounds of combat. So it kind of solves itself by the time you've leveled up a couple of times. Once you've leveled up a couple of times, if you weren't quite able to make it to the dungeon, all you need to do is fairy wings to the beginning, and then you can dodge enemies. And the few fights you get into, you can easily get past with by just spamming your AOE attacks.
Yeah, you
So
can.
the thing that you find so compelling and interesting, I find utterly unremarked. And I think that the fact that this is the most interesting part about the combat demonstrates just how bad the combat really is.
I didn't say it was the most interesting thing. I thought that it was like something that kind of underpins a lot of your decisions in the game, in the combat. And I want to be clear on this kind of early. I'm not the biggest fan of the combat in this game either. I just thought that this was one of the things that made it not completely terrible.
Okay, I think that this is a consequence of the terrible combat systems. The fact that you have to be constantly managing your HP and mana. And I think games like uh, Divinity Original Sin 2 that where your HP and mana is easily replenishable at the beginning of every fight, and any other RPG that heals you up to full at the beginning of every fight, instead of you having to watch these fucking status bars all the time, are far better RPG systems
Why?
because it's not interesting. That would be my key criticism of it. If the process of going through all these dungeons is the same, that is, you manage your mana a little bit, and if you don't quite make it, you're now a lot stronger and you can breeze through the dungeon. If that's the process every single time, I haven't actually done anything differently the 30th time I've done it. I'm doing this same thing over and over again. And that, in a sense, is my key criticism of this combat and this game's combat system, the sheer repetitiveness of it. Once you have managed your HP and mana a bit, you've done it. You've figured it out. You get the game, you get the trick that the game is trying to play on you. When you're doing it 20 hours later and you're doing the same management, it no longer has my interest. This is not the kind of game I want to play.
I agree with you that repetitiveness is this game's biggest flaw. I think that the problem isn't the mana management necessarily. It's that in every dungeon, the management is done in the same way, right? This game has basically no character customization to speak of whatsoever. Every character levels up, and then some of them get an abilities at certain levels, right? And you basically have no control, and each character doesn't get that many abilities. That the difference between doing your dungeon, like the second dungeon and the last dungeon, are really very similar. I think if the enemies were kind of incentivizing you to use more, like a lot more different skills and making the management more interesting, then it would be fine. Like, I don't think the management is the issue. I think the issue is at a more fundamental level of like what skills the characters have, and when they're incentivized to use these skills. I don't think the game gives you enough interesting opportunities to decide between using one skill or another.
And that's the thing. All you've got left is mana and HP management. That's because the fundamental combat is so uninteresting. The only way in which this game challenges you, I guess, is in this, how you sustain yourself. But the fact is that that's not interesting. That's not fun. That isn't why I play video games. The efficiency of my mana and HP management, excuse me while I go to sleep. I would far prefer to basically not worry about it. If I'm playing like I don't know, Divinity Original Sin 2, I like that each and every combat encounter is, framed around not me having a quarter of an HP for this fight, but each one is specifically designed around you having full HP and mana. And that's where the game lies, not the managing of your HP and mana from fight to fight.
So, Patrick, you play a lot of Counter-Strike, right?
Yes.
How do you feel about managing your economy?
I think it's a very important part of the game. It's I think it's one of the things that makes Counter-Strike stand out. I'm a big fan of it.
You're a big fan of it, so you like
Yes.
conserving when you need to conserve and using money when you need to use it.
So the difference in I guess understanding how the economy works in a game like Counter-Strike versus this game is that Counter-Strike is a multiplayer game. So when you're managing your economy, you're not managing your economy against a computer. You're managing an economy against another team. And it's the constant clash of those economies and one team trying to exploit the other's economy that makes the game interesting. The difference in economy also, I feel, leads to a far greater variety in combat situations. Because if it was always a full buy against a full buy, you'd have less diverse sort of struggles. With an economy, you have force buys and deagle rounds and things like that, which mix it up and give greater variety. I don't think that the economy of mana and HP necessarily produces a lot of varied combat scenarios. It just makes you a little bit stingy at times.
So I do think that the mana management has the potential to create a lot of variety in the game, but it just often doesn't reach those potentials. So for example, you come into a battle. And you're against 3 slimes that are grouped up the back and one standing in front. And the first reaction you have is that I can spend a bunch of mana to cast my circle AoE on the back line and take out maybe 2 of them if I get lucky on my hit rolls, and then I can burn down the guy at the front and the one that lived. Compare that to if you decide to just use your sword attacks. A couple more dudes are going to live till the end of the turn. They're going to run at you. They're going to change the layout of the battle, and that's going to cause you to take more damage, yada yada yada, and it spirals into something different. The problem is what happens in Lunar isn't different enough. Like, they need to add some layer on top of that to make the management more interesting, right? Like, I agree with you that in this game it doesn't reach its full potential, and I think that the biggest problem overall is just that the battles aren't varied enough.
So let's also look at the fact that I think taking damage also costs mana, because
Yes.
healing your characters in between battles and during battles costs mana. So
Yeah.
you're basically trying to figure out, am I going to use less mana by using this AoE attack or by healing my party? And often it feels kind of close. It feels kind of similar, and it doesn't feel like it's going to matter that much. You're going to go through mana one way or another. I think that the problem is also exacerbated. I don't know if this is moving into a slightly different area, but I feel like the way the enemy design is and the way these encounters flow is that the enemies hit hard.
Yeah, they punish you really hard for making mistakes. Yeah.
2/3 to 3/4 of your HP. So you're heavily incentivized to burst damage these people down as fast as you possibly can. So if you don't do that, if you get cute with spells, or if you're like, well, I'm going to attack a bit, you're going to take a heap of damage on your heroes, and then you're going to have to use mana to heal them anyway. So you may as well just bite the bullet and try and kill them as fast as you can.
I don't know when the repetitiveness kind of set in for you, because it took quite a while for it to
Immediately.
set into me. Probably about halfway through the game, I'm going to say. And one of the reasons that the combat remained interesting for me for a little while was that, and it's kind of a story related thing, is that many characters often joined and left your party like at a whim. You spend the first half of the game changing your character party pretty consistently, like every, I don't know, 30 minutes or so, you'd get someone come and leave. And because of that, I found that, the different spells that I had access to when I had and didn't have a certain character made, the combats more interesting. About halfway through the game, this stops happening because you kind of get a very static party that just remains the way it is. And from then on, just every combat started to become the same thing over and over and over and over again, because you've very rarely got new spells, and I find that kind of frustrating, especially because there's no character customization whatsoever in this game.
I wasn't as entranced by the novelty as you. I will admit that when I got a new character, it was kind of cool, but it only took a few fights for me to figure out what that kit effectively was. It doesn't help that one of the characters is just a swap out for your healer, because you lose a healer at some point and it's like, well, here's a new healer because good luck beating this game without one. I mean, Alex and Kyle, your two melee attacking heroes, have AoE attacks, are good at hitting people, and both power themselves up. Then you have a couple of casters that do big AoE damages. I mean, it's really not that interesting. And like I said, although theoretically you have heroes that clear status conditions and heroes that put debuffs on the enemy heroes, the way in which the combat flows incentivizes burst damage. So 99% of the time, and I mean 99, that is an exaggeration. 99% of the time, it's best to just try and kill everything as fast as you possibly can.
Yeah, I didn't find that to be the case. Sometimes there's like a lot of situations where it's worth taking a few hits. Using like one or two heals is less expensive than some of the other spells. That kind of choice there was what I enjoyed when I noticed, it's actually better to use this here rather than that, and it wasn't obvious to begin with. That was fun, but it wears off quite quickly. And, the repetitiveness of the gameplay going into, probably after the first third of the game onwards is, a real downside to this one.
I've said many times on this show that the number one thing I hate in video games is grinding. Grinding is a sort of thing. If I'm playing a game that's not for the podcast, if a game requires any grinding of me, I will stop playing it.
Well, that's good because this game doesn't need it, right?
Hard, James, but this is the thing. The entire fucking game is grind. That's what I realized about JRPGs. That was my big revelation, and in a way I have this game to thank for it. Grind is basically when you have to do repetitive dull content endlessly. Every single fight in this game, with the exception of a few bosses, counts as grind. Every single fight goes exactly the same way. And when you get to the 20th hour mark, or the 15th hour mark, and you go into another identical dungeon that's just been textured differently, and you play against different textured enemies with slightly different spells, and you use those same AoE spells over and over again, it made me realize that all these games do is make you endlessly grind. My eyes, I had a dead look in my eye playing this game, James. I was sitting there with my controller with 1,000-yard stare as I got into yet another battle against some retextured slime monsters. And I was like, what am I doing playing this piece of garbage game?
It's really funny to me that you think that this is grinding. This game
All
has
of it is.
zero grinding.
Sorry, go on. You make your case.
Okay, so this game has, the bosses in this game scale to your level. There's no character builds, there's nothing you need to work towards to make your character stronger. So there's really zero incentive to sit around in the dungeon just hitting things to level up. There is no grinding in this game. You just progress, you get to the end of the dungeon, and then you go on to the next one. I think that you saying that just doing the core gameplay loop over and over is grinding is stupid. Because, what's the difference between going through and doing, a battle or going through something like Call of Duty and clicking on a head and then going to a differently textured level and clicking on another head with the same gun and then going through another level with a different texture and then clicking on the same level? How, that's not grinding. How is this grinding?
I am so glad you asked, James, because I have an answer for this question. It comes in two flavors, the first of which is the time in which it takes to click on a head. It takes less than a second. In fact, it could take as little as 1/3 of a second to click on a head. Whereas your average combat encounter in this game can easily take a minute and a half. to get through a single combat encounter. And the difference between a third of a second and a minute and a half is significant.
Yeah, but there's a lot more thirds of a second than there are combat encounters in this game. Like, you'll kill 1,000 grunts in that game, and you'll do like 20 combat encounters in a dungeon in this game.
I wouldn't say it's exactly the same, but I do take your point. It is easier. It is, there are more mooks you have to shoot in the head. But my second and far more compelling point is I think that the thing that defines grind is how compelling the content is. And it is very.
I accept your point that a lot of the combat encounters in this game are extremely repetitive and tedious, but to me, my definition of grind is repeating the same content in like one area over and over, trying to obtain a specific thing. I really don't consider this to be a grindy JRPG at all. There's basically nothing that incentivizes you to like like for example, in World of Warcraft, there are some, there's these dragon mounts you can ride, right? And they have a 0.005% chance to drop when you kill a specific enemy. There was a guy who was staying at my house previously who was like dead set on getting one of these items, and so they spent like 8 hours straight sitting in this one room killing the same enemy every time it respawned. Like, that's grinding. This game doesn't have that bullshit.
But see, James, all it requires is a shift in perception to pull back the illusion of what the game is presenting you, to make you realize that while you might be killing enemies in differently colored rooms, you are still performing the exact same actions from start to finish in this game. Yes, you're in the ice cave instead of the fire cave. And yes, you are moving up through different levels and going up and down staircases. But the actions you are taking at the beginning of the game are near identical to the actions you take at the end of this game. It never evolves in a strategic or tactical sense like a game like XCOM. It is the same game. Doing it in different locations doesn't mean it's not grind. This is the revelation, James. This is the thing I realized. If you were taking the same mechanical actions, it doesn't matter where you are, it is still grind because you are doing the same thing over and over again, endlessly for hours on end.
So, what, your main criticism here is the same as my criticism. Like, our definitions are clearly different here. But, like, this game is super repetitive in its combat, right?
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. So, do you think they could have done a better job with this combat system, with the movement, with the characters being on each side of the screen? Do you think that this game failed to live up to its potential, or do you just think that it's flawed from the get-go?
Well, that's the thing, James. Now, I haven't played a lot of JRPGs, but I've got this long-standing bias against them that they're complete garbage. And I think that Lunar Silver Star Story, what it's done for me in picking this game, James, you have confirmed my biases and revealed to me the truth that I was right all along. JRPGs, at least JRPGs presented in this way, are fundamentally crap games that fundamentally have crappy gameplay. And I'm shocked that more people don't realize this. You do, and maybe there are JRPGs that are different, that have different tactical depths. I reckon a game like XCOM has 100 times the depth of this game. Even a game like Vagrant Story, a game that we did for the podcast, is so much more infinitely complex and interesting. And I heavily criticize that game's gameplay than doing the same thing 100 times over. I don't know if there's a way to set a game like this up that's interesting. But the loop of AoE damage, heal, repeat is just the same thing over and over again. It's mind-boggling that anyone defends this garbage. What can I say, James? If there's a way to do this better, I have no idea. I would begin by getting an eraser and putting a big, massive crossroad through it and starting from scratch.
Ultimately, I don't actually have a problem with the baseline gameplay of Lunar Silver Star Story. I think that despite Patrick's, angry rant about JRPGs, it doesn't do a terrible job of setting the game up. Like, the combat for the first 2 dungeons or so is perfectly fine. Like, I was these games generally have a pretty, cruisy difficulty curve. I thought to myself, it'll just get more complex as the game goes on. At the start of the game, I was just picking between some spells and attacking, and I thought that, maybe near the end I'll be, rolling in options. But that's my biggest problem, is that characters never get more than 8 spells maximum. And because of that, your options for variety are just kind of limited. There's no crazy status effects or stuff like that. There's just plus attack and plus defense buffs at the most. So yeah, I don't want to harp on too much about the combat for a while, because we've gone over it. This game's pretty repetitive. I thought it was enjoyable enough for the first half of the game, and then after that, it does just slowly sink into, monotony, as Patrick has expressed.
Before we finish, you asked me before if there's anything I could suggest. So let me rate. I don't know if I have solutions, because, like I said, I think the system is fundamentally flawed. However, I do have a couple of criticisms that may imply suggestions, if you don't mind me going into them.
Go ahead.
The first thing is, I think that having the characters only able to perform one action. So say you can only heal or cast a magic spell or do an attack or defend, right? I think that having a system like that encourages a blandness and repetitive to the combat, unlike a far more delineated system. So instead of, I think that these games are better where, instead of having selecting one action to do, it would be better if you had 30 action points, and then you had a variety of spells and abilities of varying power level that cost more or less points. And that way you could have cheap but less powerful spells alongside more powerful but more expensive spells, and choosing how to combine those in interesting ways, depending on what you do with your turn, would lead to a more interesting experience.
I think that the real problem is that the enemies don't... a lot of JRPGs will require certain enemies to be tackled in a specific way. For example, you need to put, there's an enemy that has a really, really powerful one-hit kill attack, so you're incentivized to put them to sleep on turn 1 in order to avoid that, because you can't kill it in one hit because it's got too much health, so you kind of need to disable it for a turn. This game has, none of that. I think stuff like that would really add a lot. If you had to, kind of recognize certain enemies and, approach them in different ways, but it's really just, damage or more damage, right? There's no side grades, you know what I mean?
The game that comes to mind is Slay the Spire. I mean, I know you and I are big fans of that game, but basically every single enemy you fight in Slay the Spire has a gimmick of some kind.
Yeah.
It's not just they have an AoE attack, it's they'll be going after a particular type of card, or they'll power themselves up and then they'll attack you, or whenever you use an ability, they'll get stronger in this way, or they'll be one of those enemies where you have to kill
the
all
enemies
three on the
dictate
same
the
turn.
way you play, right?
Yeah,
Whereas
exactly.
They just don't do that in this game.
Even the bosses don't really do much to change your general strategy. It just takes a long time to actually do it.
I mean, I did change my strategy for some bosses mildly, but in general,
yeah.
The bosses were the best combat encounters in the game, and even they weren't particularly amazing. But I definitely don't find it as offensive as you do. It's just under average. It's whatever.
I think this is one of the worst games I've played in my entire life. I found the repetitive nature of it is offensive. And when I realized that the entire game was an endless grind, it made sense to me. I mean, I'm the kind of person who doesn't like any grinding in any games at all. Yeah. And this game has zero compelling content. So to me, it was just a gigantic waste of time to plow through this, and it never got interesting. I kept waiting for it to get interesting, and it never got there.
All right, so those are our thoughts on the combat. I'm going to cut us off here because we're about 50 minutes of this argument, and I think we should go to a music break. I feel like surely we agree in this section, Patrick. I thought the music in this game was actually pretty good.
Yeah, I was pretty high on the music as well. Although I should, for full disclosure, on the emulator, there's a button that removes the frame cap, and it makes your game run about 3 to 4 times normal speed. And I was using that. I hit a certain point where I basically didn't stop playing the game without that turned on. I wasn't using it to speed up parts of the game. I basically turned it off whenever there was dialogue or a story moment, but in the dungeons and everything, was just on fast forward, and the music is incomprehensible in those periods. So I didn't get the
Oh my
full
god.
breadth of the soundtrack, although I heard a lot of the town music. So yeah, I it's not that I dislike the soundtrack, it's just that
You didn't
I
hear
wasn't
most of
gonna
it.
I wasn't gonna
Right.
tolerate playing this game at normal speed, man. I did for a while, and I'm like, I cannot do this anymore.
I mean, I agree this game definitely needed a speed up function. Like, even a lot of the Pokemon games and newer RPGs have a skip animations option that you can tick once you're sick of seeing all the battle animations. This game needed that pretty desperately, and I too found myself speeding the game up during combat a couple. Like, I'd make my selections and then I'd skip to the next turn, basically, because, it was super repetitive, and I just wanted to get through it. But like I'm actually really, really high on the soundtrack for this game. It went well above my expectations. There's about 60 tracks on the soundtrack, and I thought it did a pretty good job, honestly, of changing the mood and the tone over the course of the story. And especially some of the overworld and some of the dungeon themes, I thought were excellent.
Yeah, so I found a lot of the music far too cheery, and
I think
like
that's not a criticism, right? That's just a personal preference of yours.
basically, I'm the kind of I like my stories with a bit of nihilism, a bit of pathos, tragedy,
Mm-hmm.
and the cheesy fucking happy music as you wander around town had me. I mean, I rolled my eyes a lot during this game, but yeah, just I'm just not a fan of that kind of music, that as sort of happy la 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 di da di da music, because I don't like fantasy worlds like that.
Well, actually, my favorite soundtrack from this game was actually one of the second Overworld track, which I wouldn't describe as being happy. I thought there was a lot of like wistful emotions in the track, and I really liked. So throughout the story, Alex is portrayed as playing an ocarina. And this track heavily features that, and it sort of represents a lot of yearning for adventure on his part and trying to find something that isn't there. And I found that it often swept into these big, like, grandiose, hopeful bits around the middle. And it just overall, I thought it was a really interesting track that kind of played with a lot of different emotions throughout it.
I quite enjoyed this track as well. Like James said, it's slightly melancholic. It's like he's yearning for something. It's a gentler track, and yeah, the ocarina is the main instrument throughout the piece. So we'll pop it on for you now. This is Overworld 2.
That was Overworld 2, and as I said, I really, really like the music in this game. Like, if I had to give an example of where I would kind of put it on my scale, if I was kind of comparing it to another game in terms of how much I like it, I would probably put it up there with something like Symphony of the Night that we did on the show.
Oh,
Like, I really, really liked this soundtrack for the most part. There are a couple of pretty mediocre ones thrown in there, but for the most part, I really liked it.
Yeah, I'm nowhere near that high, James.
Yeah.
I mean, part of it is that I didn't listen to a lot of it, but in general, it never got super annoying except for one or two places, and like I think the Spooky Forest, it kind of pissed me off with the repetitiveness of it. But overall, it was fine, and I enjoyed it, and except for the happy themes. But yeah,
There are a lot of
you should
those.
not. You shouldn't take Castlevania Symphony of the Night soundtrack in vain like that. It's very rude.
Well, okay, so you said you really don't like happy things in your life, and that's probably
Correct.
why you didn't like this game so much.
I hate
If we
fun. I hate happy things.
if we move on to general aesthetics, how did you feel about the way this game looked? So I know it's a pretty bright and colorful game for the most part, but like it's a strange one, right? Because it's a 2D sprite game for the PlayStation 1, which was kind of in that era where it was really in fashion to start pushing the boundaries of 3D graphics. How did you feel about this kind of playing it safe and trying to do the best it could with some known technology?
Well, as we've said many times on the show, going with this 2D cartoon style really pays dividends when it comes to evaluating these games many years later, because
Yeah.
all of the games that tried to go 3D just look like shit.
Shit.
That being said, this kind of style of graphics, which I refer to as RPG maker graphics, has never entranced me in the same way it entrances so many others. It's obviously very high detail. It's obviously very well done. It's very accomplished, but I can't help but feel it looks generic. Like there's this art style that these JRPGs, 2D, JRPG SNES style ones fit into, where I'm just like, it's just generic JRPG sort of things. There are a few exceptions which I'll go into in a sec, but it was basically fine for me. I think that it's obviously very well constructed and well done. But it doesn't blow me away. I'm just not really into this graphical style.
Yeah, I would say about the same. Like, I think it's very well done, but not incredible. I do say that I think this game has actually held up very well.
That's a fair thing to say. Yeah.
Yeah, because like you said, the art style lends itself to being kind of timeless quality to it. And then the 2D pixel art isn't the only art in the game. This game actually has a bunch of cutscenes, which are, rather than being done in, the graphical style of the rest of the game, they actually did this like this 90s anime style. Like, it looks like, like a full-blown production. And I thought that kind of, I was really happy they went for something timeless like that over, trying to do something funky with the character sprites, you know what I mean?
What, live action?
Yeah, I don't know.
FMV sequence.
Yeah. But yeah, in general, these cutscenes kind of, I think they were a bit static in some places. Like, the characters didn't move; they just had their mouths moving. But it does help the game hold up. I'll admit something to you that I don't know if you know, Patrick, but I actually have found that I really can't engage with a lot of really old JRPGs, like the older Final Fantasy titles, for example, because I find that the characters and the way they're portrayed on the screen in this, that RPG style doesn't really resonate with me very well. But I found here, where they have these more like visual cutscenes, and they have the character portraits when the characters are talking, which are obviously also done in that 90s anime style, and as they talk and they emote, the portraits change to express their emotions. I found that a bit easier to connect with than some of the, I don't know, like just watching a bunch of sprites in a text box. Yeah,
that makes sense. It didn't really do anything for me. They just all looked like super generic anime characters to me. I was very unimpressed. But I know you're far more into anime than I am.
I see. Patrick
particularly
is
garbage anime. So
garbage anime. Patrick is a closet weeb. Just letting
that's
everybody
not
know,
true.
and he hates to admit it.
There are specific shows I like, but it's very specific. You have to admit. Give me some credit here.
Some credit here. So
I just want to say, with the graphics, there was the one standout thing which I thought was phenomenal.
Was the grindery? Was that what you were going to say? Because that level was incredible.
I was going to say some of the boss designs, like some of the monster designs. So there is an issue where there are reused sprites that are colored differently, but there are some bosses that just look crazy good. There's one called Truffle Snouts, which is like this weird vine monster that also has electricity pads and this huge nostril. It just looks sick. It's a very
Yeah, it does. Yeah.
creative design, but it's kind of let down by a lot of the more generic Mook designs. But there are some bosses here which are really really cool looking.
In general, I found most of the sprite work on the enemies to be really good. They're all like quite well animated. They don't just stay still and, like
Mm.
old Pokemon style where they just like move to the side to to tackle or whatever. They actually fully animate a lot of the attacks, and I think when the game does go all out with animating the enemy models, it looks really really good. One of my personal favorites was the first boss in the game, which was the big slime monster, and I
Mm.
liked the way that it rolled around and kind of distorted its body to attack you. I thought it looked great. Some of the bosses definitely look standout, and honestly I think it mostly extends to the enemy design, although as you said there is a lot of recolor stuff going on, which pretty standard for these old games, but it doesn't do it too much to be super offensive in my opinion.
Yeah, it mainly adds to the repetitive feel of it. It almost makes the gameplay experience worse. So it's like, oh, it's this guy again, but he's a
Yeah.
different color.
Like
Yeah.
in other games, they kind of use that to indicate like what kind of strategy you should try when there's more options available to you. When it's a lot harder to figure out the optimal moves to make in your turn. But in this game, it seems a bit redundant when it's so easy to figure out what you need to do each turn.
Well, I couldn't quite figure out if there was a full blown type system. Like I figured out that ice was good against fire and fire was good against ice, but I don't know if it was like for those two specific dungeons that was going on, or if it was
No,
a sub
actually,
theme I was never fully
no.
aware of.
There's actually a lot of resistance stuff in the game, like physical and magic in general is
I knew
different as
about
well.
that
Yeah.
because there are enemies that literally take no damage from magic or physical attacks. So I was aware of that, but I didn't know if every enemy was like weak to certain elements. I didn't know if it had a full blown Pokemon system.
I never really figured it out past those two dungeons that you're talking about. I did
Yeah.
notice that there. I wish there was more of that stuff. Like, this game just needs more complexity in its combat.
Yeah, it would make you switch your brain on a bit more. But sorry, I've complained about the gameplay enough.
Let's stay away from the game. Let's stay away from the combat itself, because the combat itself is how we've determined it was already. Let's stay away from that because we'll just open that can of worms again. So, with that in mind, I guess it's time to start talking about the story. How did you want to structure this one, Patrick?
So firstly, this is full spoilers. We've given you a very basic premise of the story, but now we're going into full blown spoilers. So since I've probably convinced you that the gameplay is so great, if you'd like to go play Lunar Silver Star Story, then I would recommend doing so now, so you don't get the story spoiled for you. For those who think that this game may not be for them, which should be all of you, feel free to listen on while I tell you all about the story.
The amazing
of Lunar
story of Lunar.
Amazing story. So I guess just big picture, just trying to give you a description and trying to remain somewhat objective before I get into it. So Alex kind of goes, like James says, it starts off with him doing like this small adventure with friends, trying to get this, dragon gem to become rich. When he meets the dragon, because there's a dragon in there, of course, he says something to the effect of, "Wow, you have green eyes. You're clearly the one fated to be the new dragon master. I task you with completing the other dragon trials, and then you will be the dragon master." And he's like, wow, cool. So now he has a mini quest of his own, but it also involves going with his friend to the city to sell a gem. So that gem plotline is still the main thing, but now Alex has a reason to do other stuff. So that's the kind of jumping off point.
Yeah, sure. And so I kind of want to go over this, like, something I really actually liked about this game, kind of from a progression point of view, and how the story progresses, and full spoilers now, is that in combat, the characters, like, overall, the combat system's pretty repetitive, but one thing I did like about it is that the characters were kind of like as strong as they should be story wise, right? Like, in the beginning, you kind of get this feeling because you start, the first dungeon with 3 characters, that one of the party members really isn't pulling their weight compared to the other two. Because, Alex, the main character, is a complete machine with his sword. He just cuts things to ribbons, and Lunar is insanely powerful. Like, the kind of a lot of the, I guess we didn't get into this, and we should have. But one of the big conceits of the story, is that Alex's love interest is part of the main cast, and she's like got this really like powerful singing voice that kind of allows her to heal people and do all this other sort of stuff, like put enemies to sleep. And that's really you find that really overpowered in the first dungeon. Meanwhile, your third party member, the guy who like started the whole ordeal by wanting you to go and make money, Ramus, is just completely fucking useless. And actually, as you level him up, he starts to like drop off more and more, even though he already kind of began being useless. And over the course of this first arc, he kind of comes to terms with that, he's not cut out for being an adventurer, but they never really say this out loud until the really end. You get this feeling as you're playing the game delivered to you naturally rather than through dialogue. And I really liked Ramus's initial character arc of, instead of sticking with the party, he elects to actually, in this moment where he kind of like mans up and takes the reins of his destiny, decides to become a merchant in the, the biggest town of the story. Yes, Patrick?
Very illegal way. In a very
It was
illegal
incredible. I laughed so hard when, full spoilers. So what happens is you take the gem to the shop, right? And the shop owner's like, all right, I'm going to check if this is a real dragon diamond, because lots of people come with fake ones. And then he disappears into the back room and, just never comes back. And you're like, what the fuck is this guy doing with my diamond? So, naturally you go down in the sewers and you fight monsters and you corner this guy who's trying to run away with your diamond. And, you beat the shit out of the monster he summons and then corner him and threaten him. And Ramus is like, and this is one of my favorite dialogue moments of the game. He basically says the amount of, all right, you can keep the diamond, but I'll give you the diamond in return for your shop. And the guy's like, yeah, anything, just don't hurt me. And he's like, aha, now that I own the shop, which I sold the diamond to, I also own the diamond, dickhead, and I own you. And I don't know, I thought it was really funny at the time, him just being a complete scumbag to this other character.
And the other two are fine with it, of course.
Yeah, of course they are.
Unfortunately, it's not a legally binding contract, so all that guy needs to go is go to the cops, and he'll go to jail for attempted murder probably. But they're essentially blackmailing him so they get rich. So yeah. I mean, there's some dubious ethics at work that no one really seems to comment on.
Yeah, of course. I mean, this game doesn't take itself too seriously for the most part, and I kind of appreciate that. I'm much more happy with this whimsical adventure having a lot of, wiggle room to what's going on in the world as opposed to it trying to, I guess, cater to every little detail. And it doesn't do that, and for the most part, it doesn't even do a good job of catering to the big details. But I did like this moment, and I did like a lot of the other moments where characters showed a lot of initiative, as opposed to just being dragged around by the main character for the entire game. Like, for the most part, and in the part of the game which the combat didn't, kind of grate on me, I really liked that a lot of characters joined the party when it suited them, and then, left and rejoined as it made sense to, rather than just you having this squad of 5 people that, it doesn't even make any sense why you're together anymore. Like, when you finally form the full group, it makes sense that happened, and up until that point, every character acts as they should, right?
I will say the whole Ramus thing, it kind of... I kind of thought it was funny because there's a moment earlier on where Lunar tries to do the same thing.
Yeah.
And as the boat is leaving, he's like, Lunar, jump on the ship. It's like incredibly melodramatic and like over the top. I'm like, oh my God. And she eventually jumps over the ship and they make it and they're like, wow, this is amazing. And then when Ramus is like,
slaves?
I'm going to leave the party. And he's like, "Oh no, Ramus, don't go. We really want you to stay."
Except he
It's
was
not,
really useless instead of incredibly overpowered like Luna was.
yeah, not anywhere
So,
near the same sincerity to get him to stay in the party that there was for Luna.
I mean, like that occurred to me too, but then I kind of got over that because really, like, it's not like like Ramus is not going on his own adventure. He's still, going out from this boring town and making his way in the world, right? He's not
I mean,
like
it's not quite the same.
it's not the
It's
same.
basically it's basically the adventures of Hot Pie from Game of Thrones. While Arya goes off and kills the Night King, Hot Pie works in an inn. That's the
Well,
difference.
it's
I don't know if
different
you could
because
say
Ramus is looking to make it. He's looking to make a fortune rather than working in some shitty shop, right? He's basically running a business. I think it's a
sure.
lot more. It's a lot better than Luna staying in the village and doing nothing, right?
Sure, good for Ramus. I'm very happy for him.
Yeah,
Should we move to some more big picture stuff?
yeah, sure.
All right, let's move on. So basically, yeah, that's kind of the first bit of the game, and then you get to the second bit of the game, which is very. It kind of happens very quickly. You kind of get these vague rumblings of a group called, and I quote, the Vile Tribe. So I mean, good start, good name. You already know that they've got a good marketing team because they've called themselves the Vile Tribe. Very very shortly before they kind of unveil themselves, and basically you're in the throne room meeting, I want to say, like the head of the Magic Academy or
Yeah,
something, the head of the,
yeah. The leader of the Mage Guild, right? Yeah,
and you've done a few jobs for the Mages Guild and stuff, and this is the first time you're meeting her, and you get and see her, and she's like, "These are traitors trying to kill people. Execute them immediately. Take them to the dungeons." And you're like, "Well, this is a little out of nowhere."
yeah,
And then you get thrown in the dungeon, and then the daughter of the person who you've met previously just unlocks the dungeon and lets you wander around with her, and all the guards and everyone else is like, all right, I guess she's doing that now. Very strange. Oh, you also take a lady with a mask on her with you for no real reason that I can ascertain. She's not helping you in combat or anything. She's just kind of following you
well, the
around
characters
as
feel
you murder
bad for them,
monsters.
right? Like,
Well,
but
yeah, so
well,
drop her off in a bedroom to go to sleep,
yeah,
right?
yeah. I mean, I guess like at this point, the main characters have this suspicion that something's funny is going on with the leader of the Mages Guild, like some because it's this other character's mother.
Mum,
And
yeah.
she's like, yeah, she's like, this. My mother would never act like this. There must be something wrong. We can't leave this other character in the dungeon under this, under my addled mother's care. So, I mean, I do agree. It's a bit funny, but nothing that I would raise an eyebrow at, really.
I raised an eyebrow. That was the extent of it. It wasn't. Anyway, they battle up through the tower and they get to the big room where they're making Luna sing a specific song of some kind, and then your antagonists for the game get revealed. It's the Vile Tribe. It's another body snatcher. We've got another freelancer situation where these people are pretending to be people they're not.
Mm.
And the Vile Tribe, as it seems to be very little information on them. Apparently, 500 years ago, Athena, who is the goddess, there are statues to her everywhere, banished the Vile Tribe to the Outlands, which is like a desolate wasteland. Think, in The Lion King, how the good guy, how the pride has the beautiful oasis and
Yeah,
everything, and lots of mammals to kill who worship them as kings. And then you've got the dark side where it's all hyenas and there's nothing to eat and skulls everywhere. That's what the Outlands are
yeah, I
like.
think
Yeah,
that's a fair comparison. Yeah.
it's not a fun place to live. So the Vile Tribe committed an act of evil, an unspecified act of evil. We never find out what it is, I don't think. And so Athena's like, for the past 500 years, that's right, 500 years, they've been banished, not allowed back. 500 years punishment for unspecified act of evil. So not only is Athena punishing the people who did this act and the people who live with them, but she's also punishing their descendants for 500 years. So, I mean, right off the bat, you're like, that's pretty suspicious, that sort of action.
Yeah.
I was like, what's going on here? Anyway, so the Vile Tribe has come in And the reason they're doing it is unclear at this stage. They just want to make Luna sing, and that's all that we really know at this point, right? I think there's rumblings of the Magic Emperor, right? That it gets mentioned once
Yeah,
or
if you
twice.
talk to a lot of people, and we'll get into that later because there's a lot of like side dialogue in this game. But actually, let's go into it now quickly on a tangent if you want.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
So in a lot of JRPGs or in a lot of games in general, games will have like a little bit of side world building by having you, able to go and inspect objects and talk to a character. And usually it'll just be something like, you walk into a town and you talk to a guy and he says something short to you, like to your party as a whole. It's like, I wonder what's on the wind today, or something boring like that. And that's all they have to say, right? In this game, they actually went to a lot of effort in adding extra dialogue to the game. Like, every single character has, like, 2 to 3 whole conversations. Some of them are like little short tidbits as well, but they generally have more meatier things to say in this game. And, like, the dialogue updates constantly every single time the story progresses. Like every single NPC.
I didn't even know that.
Did you not know that? Every single
No.
NPC in the entire world gets new dialogue anytime the story progresses anywhere, like at all. And they get like 2 to 3 extra bits of dialogue as well, like not just like a throwaway line. Like it's crazy impressive how much little bits of dialogue there are in this game. I actually spent a lot of time traveling around and talking to people because there's a lot of stuff that people have to say about kind of the world building and just stuff that's happening and commenting on your adventures in general. And kind of even more, something that I really liked more than that is that usually in these games, when you talk to these characters, they only talk to the main character or to the player. Whereas here, they usually specifically have conversations with other members in your party, like back and forths, and I thought that that was really good in that it helped that give a lot of your characters in your party more characterization. Because something that I find a lot of these games kind of lack is that like extra little oomph to flesh out some of the characters in your party, because there is so much dialogue here. And so much of it is directed not at you, but different members of your party. And like they'll talk to one party member, which will then spark off a whole conversation between 2 of your party. There's a lot, right? There's a lot if you want to go looking for it. They did a lot of effort to kind of flesh out the NPCs in this game, and I'm honestly really shocked.
Yeah, I'm not as hard on it as you are. I think that most of the dialogue tends to be very regional and, like you said, focused on the events you're doing. I wouldn't say the world building is as good in a game as like Archimedean Dynasty, which I felt really helped flesh out a unique world. At the end of the day, this is still a somewhat generic fantasy-esque world. That being said, I want to be fair with my criticism, and broadly speaking, I agree with you. Whenever I play these games, I always make a note of speaking to every single character. I did speak to them a few times. Like there were a couple of world-shattering events that happened that I did speak to, the random guards around the palace and everything, just because I assumed that'd be an update. But I didn't speak to them quite as much as you did. I spoke to them enough that I was enjoying speaking to every single character in the game. And I just consider it part of playing these games to get it fleshed out. So I agree that it's well done. And like you said, it's better done. I haven't seen it done better in any sort of like similar style game. It's certainly a lot better than something like Pokemon.
I don't know, like a couple of the times I teleported back to the first town, and like every single time I did that, all the dialogue was completely different and they were talking about the current events. I don't know if you went back and spoke to the main character's parents ever, because I went back and they actually revealed a lot of plot stuff that wasn't mandatory. I was quite surprised that
No, I hated my parents had more important things to do, save the world.
Yeah.
Didn't have time to nip back to see mum and dad.
That's why you don't like happy things.
What did they say?
A lot of this game centers around the main character and his love interest, Lunar, which, suspiciously early on, you notice that they live together when they're like 14 in Alex's parents' house, and they kind of like go into that and explain how she got there and like what happened when, and how they grew up and all that kind of stuff. Like they basically gave a lot of the backstory for the main two characters that was weirdly lacking otherwise, I found.
Yeah, no, yeah, and so it's broadly speaking well done. I agree with you. This is one of the few areas where I think they've done a good story. There's definitely an attention to detail here in this regard.
So returning back to the original plot point, sorry.
Yeah, so then Galleon, who's you've met before, he's one of the chief people in the Mages Guild. He's the master of one of the people in your party who's a mage called Nash. He's like, the Vile Tribe is serious business. Can you take me to the White Dragon, and hopefully he can help guide us? So you take him to the White Dragon, and turns out he was the evil guy all along, and he reveals himself as the one who's planning to become the magical emperor. And he kidnaps Lunar at that point. And that becomes the driving goal of Alex and your party as a whole. Alex must become the Dragon Master so he can confront Galleon and rescue Lunar.
Did you talk to many people when you had Galleon in your party? Because he is an absolute dickhead to every NPC you talk to.
No, I didn't. We'll get into it more later, but Galleon is one of the few characters I actually like, although I still think he's problematic. But I'm nowhere near as high on the characters as you are, James. So okay. I wasn't as high on the character interactions.
Well, it was really funny. Like you just talk to anybody and he'd talk down on them like they were absolute scum. Like when you first meet him, he doesn't really act like that at all. He just like acts like a powerful mage in the Mages Guild. And then when he's in your party and you're going around, and because you have to go back to one of the earlier areas, and I kind of liked that you did that because he is like, it shows off how powerful this character is. You go through this forest that you adventured through at the beginning, and he just destroys the entire screen with one spell every single time. He annihilates everything. Like, it really sets up how much stronger he is compared to the rest of the characters. And when you talk to the people in the town and he's just talking about them like the peasant scum, I kind of started seeing, I was like, okay, this guy's evil now, because I actually hadn't called it earlier because of the way the other characters were revealed to be evil with him in the room.
Yeah, I hadn't either. It was well done.
Yeah, I actually thought it was like a double twist that I wasn't expecting. I kind of liked that. Sorry, guys who are listening to this, you just got spoiled, but we warned you. Warning. Yeah.
And yeah, that's where the story goes. So just broadly speaking, my main criticism of this whole thing is that I don't think the Vile Tribe were given enough of an introduction. They weren't fleshed out enough, and they weren't kind of seeded into the world earlier to make their revelation more meaningful. They were like mentioned 15 minutes before you meet them, so it just didn't feel.
Yeah, I actually think this game feels like, in terms of plot progression, I'm okay with the general structure. Like it's pretty bland overall when you like look at the window dressings or whatever. But in terms of like just raw story beats, I'm okay with it. I just think that there are a couple of missing like story sections that need to be in the game for it to work. The first off is the one that you mentioned. Fleshing out the villain tribe and kind of explaining their backstory and what's gone on, over in their side of the world a bit more. They do take you there, but I don't think it's anywhere near as expansive as it needs to be to kind of carry their part of the plot. And the second part is kind of to do with Galleon and his motivations as a villain, which I think has a good direction, but I don't think nails what they're trying to go for, right? So
yeah, I've got both those things written down. So can we just talk about the Vile Tribe a bit more first?
Sure. Where do you want to go with them?
So the first thing I want to say is that Althena, as she is presented, is a massive bitch. I don't know about you, but 500 years? 500 years. Okay, I can accept that there was a tribe that did something unspeakably evil. I'm happy to accept that. And I'm happy to accept that you banish that tribe and their children to a remote place for 50 years.
So just to clarify, Was it like a sentence of 500 years, or was it like eternal banishment and it had
Well,
just happened to be 500 years?
Althena only stopped being Althena 15 years ago. So
Sure.
she was around 400 and 85 years ago. So she was a goddess that was like present on the moon that entire time.
Okay.
So to me, it's 485 years, and she's like, yeah, this is completely fine, this is completely justified. So but no one ever raises that, and in fact it's highly problematic because the vile tribe towards the end of the game turns from, oh, what happened to us was unjustified, to, oh, we just need to beg Althena for forgiveness. And at this point I'm like, this is fucking stupid. Like, you have a real potential seed for conflict between humans and the vile tribe, right? These people have a very legitimate reason to hate humans if Althena is deliberately keeping them away from grass for 500 years. And instead of that conflict being realized, oh no, it turns out that Althena was completely justified in that horrific act this whole time. So I got really upset about that, the way that this race of people was disregarded and treated like shit when we could have had a far more interesting conflict between two factions.
Yeah, I generally agree. I think in order to sell the plot that they were going for, they really needed to flesh out this second faction. And I basically, up until the point that we went into their, their hometown or whatever, I was okay with the whole setup because I figured that, there would be, it must have been a very evil act in order for that to happen. And they just never, I don't think they ever really expanded on it,
They don't.
honestly. Yeah,
It's cowardice. Like, tell us they did something horrific, and then it gets more interesting. The fact that they all go back on it and they're like, wow, maybe humans aren't too bad after all. I'm like, are you kidding me? Like, are you kidding me? Like, look at what it's unbelievable that this is what the game
I
does.
was
It
okay
takes
with
the
that
easy
bit.
way
Like
out.
they like not all of them changed their mind, and only the ones that changed their mind about humans were the ones that had their lives kind of saved or improved by the main cast. I'm okay with a couple of them being like, "Oh, you guys aren't so bad," but all of them, it makes no fucking sense.
Yeah, so I really disliked the handling of the antagonist in this. There's the seed for a great conflict here, and it's just terribly mishandled. Did you have comments on Galleon? Because I certainly do.
Yeah, I actually like Galleon's direction. Like, when he's revealed to be a villain, it's in this very over the top villainous Saturday morning cartoon way. Like, he seems like he's evil for the sake of being evil. And then later on in the story, they try to add a bit more depth to him, and his motivations seem to be about him actually trying to do what's best for humanity in his own twisted view, which I was okay with. I'm much more on board with a villain like that than one that's just evil for the sake of it. And basically, Galeon's motivation kind of boils down to the fact that he thinks that humans. So basically, in the story, the goddess Althena was leading humanity towards a bright future, and in the story it's said that basically, Althena determined that her existence in the world was causing problems, like it was giving rise to religion and people were worshipping her as an idol, and, they weren't kind of moving forward on their own behalf. They were, like, attached to her at the hip and they weren't progressing as a race, so she decided to give up her divinity and become immortal among the rest of the humans by being reincarnated as a small child.
And there's also this idea that she's living on in their hearts. It's a very Holy Spirit sort of idea.
Yeah, and I was really okay with that. I thought that was a cool idea. And Galeon's like big driving force is that he thinks that that was the wrong decision, and that humans need a higher being to kind of lead them towards a bright future, and that what Athena thought was the solution isn't working out. The problem for me is that they never really show humans not working out because of this.
Yeah.
The society seems perfectly fine as far as I can tell throughout the game. They don't seem to need this guiding light. Like, if they gave clear examples in, like, some scenarios where obviously if there was a god, like, things would have worked out better, I would have bought Galeon's motivation a lot more than I do in the state that the game is.
The real problem is that Galleon doesn't listen to his god. He's like, God, you need to be God in this way. And God's like, well, no, actually, I need to be God in this way. And he's like, God, no, you must be God. There's like a little contradiction there. If it's God, then what he's doing is correct. Now, you can disagree with people who interpret it in different ways. So what they could have done is they could have set up a far more complex conflict in regards to Dane. Like they could have made it that Dane corrupted Athena. Like that could have been a theme, and that Galleon believed that Dane's human love, corrupted. But instead, in the cutscene, he's like, I don't understand why she's doing this. It's like, motherfucker, just say that you believe that he corrupted her with, with lust or whatever it happens to be, debasing her divinity, whereas he needs her to remain whatever. There are ways that this could have been done that made sense, but as presented, it makes basically no sense. So his whole motivation as a villain is stupid.
Actually, at a high level, I really like the direction. I think it has the potential to be a really cool story in terms of Galeon's motivations and, this idea of needing the goddess. I think that could be really cool, but ultimately the hero needs to be more virtuous, and he's just a young stupid kid compared to this infinitely wise mage, and there's no really other way for that to happen other than the mage to be intelligent but not wise.
I mean, he can just have a different, I know I've brought up Thanos before, but Thanos is misguided because he believes that the only way to save the universe is his very specific plan of killing half the universe, thus preserving its resources. Now, if he'd thought for a moment, he could be like, why don't I just double the resources? But he doesn't, because he's on this misguided attempt. But the problem is, I don't think Galleon is simply misguided. I think that it doesn't make any sense at all. Like, you can't really draw a line saying, wow, his actions make sense. And he does the whole evil laugh thing. Just get me out of here. These villains are so poorly done. Villains are interesting when they're just a little bit sympathetic, and you can kind of understand where they're coming from. You can empathize and sympathize with what they're doing. I think the best villains aren't villains at all. But if you're going to do a villain, you got to make him interesting and sympathizable, not just cackling maniacs.
Well, I mean, I think you can make him. I think you can make villains entertaining by being charismatic, or as opposed to having a good motivation, and that alone, if it's done well enough, can carry a villain. But Galleon definitely doesn't do that. He's just very, very generic cackling villain. So I too, with you, have some problems with a lot of the major story beats. But in terms of, everything outside of the villain, I didn't really mind the progression too much. On these kind of hero's journey style stories, the main thing that they need to do, in my opinion, is take the party characters into a whole different bunch of situations and have them, react naturally and grow as people. And I didn't really mind.
But before we get into that, James,
sure,
we need a music break.
Yes, we do. I think
because we're
chewing down time here. I'm not looking forward to the editing tomorrow. Patrick, it is your turn to select a track.
So, as I said earlier, I wasn't quite as high on the music as James was. I still thought it was very good. My favorite piece is one called Mysterious Cave. It starts off with some snare drums, and then, you've got this deep bassy noise that sounds somewhat synthesized. And it sounds as though it's like some light xylophone playing, although honestly, it's probably also synthesized as well. But it's got a very, it's got a light feeling of adventure to it. It's not so generically cheerful as some of those town themes, which I hated. But it does have that feeling of adventure to it. And with an element of danger, I want to say. And it's just an interesting piece. It's got a nice variety of synthesized instruments, and it's got a nice bit of variety throughout the track. So this here is Mysterious Cave.
That was Mysterious Cave, and I also really liked that track. That was probably in my top 3 throughout the game, with the third one being the battle theme that I kind of soured on a bit near the end because I associated it with the repetitive battles, but for the most of the game, I didn't mind hearing it all the time because it's a really good piece of music. So, as we were about to loot on, we're going to start talking about, I guess, some of the character interactions and a bit more of, the party traveling around the world. And it's funny because I haven't said much good about this game at all until now. I've agreed with Patrick that the combat's repetitive and that there are some major problems with the overall structure of the plot. But this is actually probably my favorite part of the game. Are the character interactions and the party. Like, when I play a JRPG, the number one important thing to me is that I like the characters that are in my party. They don't have to be super complex or deep or have crazy character arcs. They just have to be, entertaining to be around for the entire length of the game. And I really found that for the entire length of the game, even though I was souring on the battles a lot, I still really liked, going on this adventure with these dumb kids, having their dumb arguments constantly, because, they're just like a bunch of entertaining characters. They're not like super complex or anything, but I think the dialogue really kind of oozes with charm throughout. They didn't take it too seriously, and there's a lot of really, really stupid and silly shit mixed in there, and I really found that quite engaging throughout the experience. And I assume that Patrick fucking hated it.
Correct. I found it terrible. I think these characters are all incredibly one note and simple. I found all the romance stuff incredibly unconvincing because they're all 15 and 16 years old. And if you've ever had to deal with young people and romances, they're fucking retarded. It doesn't make any sense for me to take any of these romances even remotely seriously. And even if you did, that 15 years old, the average relationship length is 2 weeks. I can't believe in true love based with 15-year-olds. It's just stupid. But my main criticism is that I found these characters very one note. They all had one defining personality characteristic and they played it straight the entire way. I found a lot of the characters obnoxious and annoying. The way they speak to one another has no subtlety to it
so
whatsoever.
Funny. There was no subtlety whatsoever, and I fucking loved it the entire time. It was great.
Yeah, I think basically, James, I think you've been watching far too much anime because this sort of stuff is like it's insipid, like it's stupid and dumb. And I mean, I understand that there are people who would enjoy this. This part of the game is interesting because I hate this. I think it's very poorly written, essentially. But I accept that some people enjoy this insipid banter between idiots. So it could very well be that this is the kind of thing that you enjoy in your stories. Insipid banter between children. And if so, this game is for you.
I always kind of forgot that the characters were supposed to be that young. To me, I always felt they were like mid to late 20s the entire time based on the way they're acting. Like, for example, Kyle is the leader of the bandits. That's not something a 15-year-old does, and basically all the characters act a lot older than they're said to be in the dialogue, so I kind of just forgot that early on and just kind of went with it. I really liked the stupid dialogue. When they translated this game into English, I've read online a lot that this translation is of note for taking a lot of creative liberties, quote unquote, with the dialogue. There's a lot of stuff that raises the eyebrows a lot of the time, but I found that stuff to be really entertaining. Like, for example, early on, or like kind of like in the middle of the adventure, you go to this town that's, it's a town that's made of wooden boards across a river, and it's like, for some reason they've localized it to be full of like rednecks, like people that are a very low status, not very educated. You're just idiots basically. And you get there, and Nash, who's probably my favorite character in the game, he's an absolute dickhead who thinks he's better than everyone. Like, he's the main villain's pupil, and a lot of that guy's hubris has rubbed off on him, and he's just an arrogant asshole for probably the first, 3/4 of the game before he goes on his own little arc. But you get to this town full of rednecks over this wooden boarded river, and the dialogue goes, no, the amazing part is not that they managed to, build this town. The amazing part is that these hicks managed to nail anything not related to them. And, like, I burst out laughing at this part. It was fucking hilarious. It was awful, but I loved this shitty dialogue that was all throughout the game.
Yeah, didn't you find it kind of? I mean, obviously, I wasn't very immersed in this game, but isn't that somewhat immersion breaking? Basically, he's in a teen romance with another girl, and he's blushing when she's saying anything even vaguely romantic and like doubling down on, I'll do anything to protect you. And then out of nowhere, there's this line about hicks
It's
nailing
so
their
funny.
relatives. It's very incongruous, and I agree with you, it's funny, but it also feels like a misstep. Like this game seems to be for children, right? And this is like,
Yeah, so the way I kind of saw that was that he was kind of shy because he was talking directly to the person that was the object of his affection, rather not so much the subject matter itself. And that's kind of how I worked it in my mind.
okay,
That thought didn't even occur to me, honestly. There's all sorts of like adult jokes all throughout this game, and like honestly, I found it way more entertaining than if this had been just like, I don't know, generic fantasy stuff. The characters say a lot of suspicious things all the fucking time, and it's great. I found this game had so much charm in it, and I've like I was looking online to see people's opinions of the dialogue, and it seems to be a fairly even split between people who fucking hate this localization and people that fucking love it and think it's like the best thing ever. So it's definitely something that's not going to be for everybody, but for me, this really made the game for me. And because, like, as I said before, there's so much dialogue throughout the world and with all the characters, like, I was always traveling around the world to find out what everyone was saying, because there was, like, a lot of hidden gems in there. Not all of them stuck. There was a lot of weird brand references that I didn't quite like and I thought were a bit tasteless. But, for the most part, I found the character interactions, the banter, and the party dynamic to be so good that despite getting real bored of the gameplay later on, I was still having a lot of fun playing the rest of the game.
yeah, I just can't agree. I mean, I just didn't enjoy it at all. Like I said, there's no subtlety to any of it,
Yeah.
and all the characters just sing their own tune. The tomboyish girl who's the priestess just gets mad and yells at everyone. The obnoxious dickhead that is Nash is just an obnoxious dickhead. The rogue-like character is just a lovable rogue womanizer, and that's the entire depth of these people's characters. I like my characters to have more going on with them, and not just saying the first thing that comes to mind that's kind of archetypical of their generic character, and that's how all the dialogue
They did have
functions.
somewhat of character. Like, I think everybody except the main character, who is, like, in my opinion, the main character is the weakest character in the whole game by, like,
The
just
blankest
a blank
slate.
slate. He does even talk, but I wish he was, more of a character. He just barely says anything of value, other than like, other than to exclaim his anger with something or to yell Lunar's name when he's trying to save her. Everyone else has so much more personality than the main character. It really kind of shit me off that they didn't put that effort on with him as well. But other than
How,
that,
how did you feel about the romance stuff?
I liked it for the most part. Like, honestly, I find that in general, a lot of these games don't have kind of preconceived romances. Like, in this game, you basically have a cast of 6 characters, all of who are in
Three
a
couples.
yeah, 3
Yeah.
couples who are basically all in a relationship with each other to some degree. And I found that way more interesting than the usual, like, one of them, being out of reach of the other one until the very end. I don't know. I kind of liked having a party with characters that, had progressed somewhat along this path. I know you probably hated it the most, but I found Jessica and Kyle's interactions like, so this couple, right? Their couple is kind of defined by the fact that they just constantly fight with each other.
I'm rolling my eyes right now.
And like every time they argue with each other, it's like somehow, even though they're fucking screaming at each other, it's like they got closer as a result of being angry at each other, and all the other characters kind of comment on that. And it develops as the game goes on. on. I found it really endearing for the most part. I think that all of the characters are fucking endearing. But I can see people hating it.
Yeah, I think there's a kind of person who would enjoy this, and it's people who like teen dramas. Like, if you like the OC, this is right up your alley. Or if you like James and you like anime, this is probably right up your alley as well. But the romances I tend to like one of my favorite authors is called Guy Cavriel K, and he writes a lot of romance into his fantasy. Fantastic author, by the way, and his romances are beautiful. But I like my romances to be tragic and filled with something deeper. And there's nothing really. I don't think there's much deep about this. You do have
See, I'm
this.
kind of like over that kind of style of romance where there's like something stupid getting in the way of the two characters, or like, I don't know,
No,
something
that's not what I
tragic.
mean. No, no, no. I'm trying to say the thing about adult relationships is that they're complicated. They're
Yeah.
incredibly complicated. And I don't think there's anything complicated about these relationships. And I understand why they wouldn't be, because they're teen fucking relationships, but that just doesn't appeal to me. If I'm going to read about romance, it better be fucking good. And that means I want to feel something, James. I can't cry, but I want my heart to bleed on the inside. And there's nothing, I don't feel anything for these characters and their love. And it's either melodramatic and over the top, and, if love is the way you'll defeat this monster sort of crap, or it's them yelling at one another. It feels either too earnest or just them yelling at one another, and it kind of wildly moves between the two. It just doesn't appeal to me. But there's an audience for teen drama, so I mean,
The like yelling at each other was like all almost like positive for the characters. It was really yeah, I don't know. That couple's relationship is a bit odd. It's not super complex, and I think it's overall probably a big flaw for the most part. But the character, like one of the final scenes that I did really like was one of the villains kind of traps everybody in this dream where they have to kind of like come to terms with their character development over the
confront
course of
their
the game.
fears.
Yeah, and it's not
Yeah.
like super in depth, but I did like it. It could have been better. It definitely could have been better, but it was something. And I really
No,
wish
I
that
agree. That was good. I credit where credit's due. That I enjoyed that scene a lot.
yeah, like Nash in particular goes from being this like complete dickhead, like Patrick level dickhead, to being to being, like realizing that he's not, like, that people have value past their status and their, their raw magical talent. People have value, because they do. I didn't say that very well, but you know what I mean, right?
Yes.
He grows as a person, and a lot of the characters do grow a little bit as a person, and I did like that, and I really wish that had happened to the main character too, because he also gets trapped in the dream. And then, like, I kind of get what they were going for with Alex. Like, he's like a paragon of virtue from the get-go, and like the story's kind of suggesting that you need somebody like that without flaws to become the almighty dragon master or whatever. But it doesn't work for me. I want a flawed character.
A moment in the story where Galleon, before he's revealed himself, is talking to you about what it is that the Dragon Master does. I mean, it's like one of the only moments where you get some definition. And he says that the Dragon Master, what happens when you have to choose between saving a loved one or saving the world. And because he said that, I was certain, like 100% certain, it's like, at the end of the game, you're going to have to make a choice whether you save Lunar or save the world. That's writing 101. It's just, they never do anything with it, and everything just gets resolved. I alternated a lot between whether I hated the story or the game more, because I hated both, and I do hate both. But I think that in the end, I need to accept that there are certain stories that just aren't for me. Like, this is just not my kind of story that I'm going to derive any enjoyment from, because it's about a bunch of dumb kids. And there wasn't effort put into, while there was effort put into some of the details of the world with the conversations, there wasn't detail put into the into how this society functions and what the Vile tribe is like. and how the antagonists were unveiled. But I'm kind of okay with that. Like the story's not for me, and that's okay.
In this story of the Retrospectives podcast, Patrick has undergone character development and realized that not every story is for him, but
Yeah,
tune in next time where he admits that grinding is for some people that aren't
that is
him as
never
well.
going to happen. I feel like I said, I've come to a revelation about the nature of that. And people who like JRPG combats are retarded and should be ashamed of themselves. But the story, if you're a dumb child, like with Mega Man Battle Network 3, you may get some enjoyment out of this. If you like teen dramas, there's something here for you. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah. If you're an edgy teenager who needs your story to be super dark and like brooding, then this is not for you guys.
Nice. We need to talk about the voice acting because it fucking sucks. It's so bad.
You don't
When-
like Niall's voice acting?
Oh my god! When this, I've completely forgot to mention this. There's some limited voice acting, and when the flying cat, speaking cat, comes up to you, I was like, "What the hell?" It sounds like someone's putting on a baby voice.
It
I was
sounds like
what-
someone's taken, like someone's breathed in helium and then
It's like,
started talking.
Why has James made me play this game? And the voice acting wasn't universally terrible. Like I said, I think Galleon did an okay job, but most of the voice actors is so bad. There's a character called Mia, and she just speaks in the most deadpan, uninteresting tone of voice that you can possibly imagine. Like some of the voice actors are bad, but at least some of them put effort into it. Oh, so bad.
I don't remember Mia's voice acting being that bad.
It's just
I do think that some of
deadpan.
it's pretty questionable for sure. Null, like you said in particular, is very quick, but he doesn't talk that much,
Thank
thankfully.
God.
Yeah, thank God. You know,
Thank Athena, am I right?
shut the fuck up. I mean, there isn't that much voice acting, though, to be honest, right?
No, it's very limited. It's just
It's
it
very
really
limited. It's mostly during the cutscenes, and
It's
yeah.
funny. This era of voice acting is notoriously bad. We had a similar thing with Castlevania Symphony of the Night. So yeah, it's quite bad.
Yeah, it's not great. Thankfully, there's not too much of it, and some of it's okay. Honestly, I thought Galeon did a good job at portraying this like stupidly comically evil character.
Yeah.
It was fine. Nothing to write home about. Was there anything else?
There was one little thing that I did like about the game that I want to bring up that I thought was hilarious.
Yeah.
Really early on in the game, you're going through the woods. And you get surrounded by like 3 forces, so like 12 monsters, and you've only really fought 4 or 5 at a time. And a character comes to your rescue, and the character goes, "Do you need help, or will you be all right?" And I thought I'd be funny, and I said, "Nah, I'll be all right." And then the fight happens, and there's 12 monsters attacking you,
And you just lose,
and he just
yeah.
stands there and lets them kill you, and then
Yeah.
you have to reload your save. I was like, what the hell, game? Why didn't he come in and save me? So I thought that was, and I tested a lot of the other dialogue options, and most of the dialogue options are fake. Like it won't let you do the negative one. But that was a really funny instance of it. Just
it was really good. Yeah,
"Oh, you don't need help, all right."
Yeah, because this is a pretty common thing in these kind of linear RPGs is that they give you these fake choices, and when you choose the bad one, you just get like an extra bit of dialogue. So I did try all of them, and that one was really funny. I'm kind of glad I made a save a bit before. But yeah, it was really funny. I generally really liked how a lot of the combat kind of meshed with the story, as I said with the Ramus bit before. And like a lot of the characters, like Nash, for example, is my favorite character. And he's a powerful mage who at the start of the game is utterly overpowered, and when he's in your party, you just plow through enemies, right? And then when you get to the end of his character arc and he's humbled and realizes that he's not the greatest, he's actually ends up being like the weakest member of your party at the end of the game. So, you know, I really liked how the characters were reflected in the combat, even if the actual like encounters themselves weren't that great.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I didn't notice that, but I think you make a good point with those two characters. I don't even know if that was intentional with him, but it certainly works out. I don't really have much else to go into, unless is there anything else you want to touch on before we move to final impressions?
Yeah, I don't really have anything else to say. I think we've basically covered everything important. Did you want to have one final rant and give, make it perfectly clear what your opinion on this game is, Patrick?
I would be delighted to, James. These are my final impressions. This is one of the worst games I've ever played in my life. I hated almost every moment I had to spend with this game, and I strongly advise you do not touch it with a 10-foot pole. As I said earlier, I alternated between hating the gameplay and story more, but in the end, the gameplay is the thing that makes this game a terrible, terrible pile of shit. Because you are forced to do the same action endlessly. And I mean endlessly. It's the same thing from the start to the finish of the game, and changing the color of the floors and the walls does not change that. The one thing I have to thank this game for is for, as I said earlier, revealing that I was right all along about the nature of JRPGs, that they truly are objectively the worst genre of video games, and that you should feel ashamed for defending this garbage. When it comes to the story, it's infantile and insipid and basic and simple, but I admit that there may be an audience for this kind of trash. So if you're into that kind of stuff, you may get some value from the story. Macro story is okay, but does still have some significant problems. Overall, I hated playing this game. This game is worse than Chrysalis. I never want to play a JRPG like this ever again, James. Please do not put me through this hell again. Let's never
Really?
do
You
any
hated
more
this more than
JRPGs
Chrysalis?
ever.
I'm
This
very
game is
surprised.
worse than Chrysalis. So yeah,
What the fuck?
I loathe this game. A game that makes its primary idea grinding is never. I'm never gonna like it. I'm so glad it's over, and I'm so glad I have finally have this full on cathartic release of my opinion, and I can share with the world how trash this is. Gaming journalists, you should be ashamed of yourselves as well for giving this anything more than a 1 out of 10. All right, James, ran over. What do you think of this game?
So, I really hope to God that one day we get a Patrick Arthur redemption arc where he goes from being this, one-note villain to having some actual taste. But, I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon. Overall, I think you can at least agree with me, is that at the very basis, at the core of this show, our question is, has this game stood the test of time? And I think that this game has actually aged exceptionally well. I think that graphically and musically, it's still really impressive to this day. I really enjoyed both the way it looks, the way it sounds, its animations, everything I thought was just filled to the brim with a lot of charm. The combat is probably, definitely the low point of the game. I quite liked it for the first, probably half the game, 12 hours or so, and then once your characters kind of stop leaving and join the party, it does become a bit of a repetitive slog, and I did find myself reaching for that fast forward button a lot of the time. And despite that, I really liked my experience with Lunar Silver Star Story Complete. Ultimately, the character dialogues, the level of detail in the world really won me over. I really wanted the adventure to keep going when I got to the end, but, with a lot less combat, to be honest. I thought that the character interactions were super endearing. The questionable at times localization was hilarious a lot of the time, even if it was a bit of outplaced sometimes. I love the party dynamic between the characters in this game, and because that's the most important thing for me when it comes for this style of game. I had a lot of fun. I think this game absolutely holds up to this day, but it's definitely, as we can tell, not going to be for everybody. You know if this is the kind of game for you. So yeah, I think this game has, outside of its combat, mostly stood up. If you're the kind of person that likes grindy kind of gameplay, you're probably gonna love this, honestly. And if you don't like grindy, repetitive gameplay, yeah, stay away from it.
It's worth pointing out that we did Vagrant Story earlier in this show, like I think episode 22 or something, and I was very critical of it. And now I'm looking at that game like a shining beacon of light. It's like Vagrant Story was a game I heavily criticized, but it was so interesting. Like it didn't have necessarily enormous depth, but it was complex. And that story was so much more sophisticated than the drivel in this game. So James, here's the deal. Don't give me anything less than Vagrant Story. That's all I ask. Don't make me sit through this kind of game again. If it's a JRPG like Vagrant Story, maybe I'll be okay. But this was too painful. I don't want to
Well, I mean, Lunar has a sequel, so
No.
obviously,
No.
obviously,
Please.
for my next game, we'll be playing
Why don't we do the 1992 game? We'll just go back and do that one, right?
they're the exact same game, and then, like, to be fair, like, to give a proper recommendation on which version of Lunar to play, we're gonna have to play all of them, right? Like, there's no other way.
Please.
Yeah, I basically, from what I've heard, the sequel uses its combat a bit better. So I won't subject Patrick to the sequel, but I will definitely be checking the sequel out because I really enjoyed my time with this first game. Actually, I've got a really funny story to tell you. I was doing some research, Patrick, on people's opinions of the story. And I actually found a textbook on story writing that used this game as a positive case study. Like a physical handbook that, case study of how to do a hero's journey justice.
Let me do this a bit louder. I'm sighing right now. I'm sighing deeply.
Basically, when I was in high school, my teachers always told me to use books as references because the internet is wrong, but books are always right. And books say that Lunar Silver Star Story has a great story, and Patrick's telling you on the internet that it's bad. So really, who are you going to trust?
The Ghostbusters. Anyway, thank you so much for listening to us today, particularly listening to me, Red. I went off the deep end a bit and didn't stop going, but unfortunately, that's how I really think. We are the Retro Spectives podcast. Each and every fortnight, James and I play through a classic. This fortnight, it was Lunar Silver Star Story. You can find all of our content on our website, rspodcast.net. It's got all 38 of our episodes at the time of this release, and also a bunch of articles. If you would like to support the show, two things you can do. Tell your friend about the show. We'd love for you to share the love around. And number two, please come and join our Discord server. There'll be a link to it in the show notes and on our website. Honestly, at the end of the day, the thing James and I love doing more than anything else is discussing and, in particular, arguing about video games. And we would love to argue with you too. So please drop by, tell me why I'm wrong, and I'll happily respond in kind.
I don't know if this episode was arguing more as me sitting here twiddling my thumbs as you got this off your chest.
Well, I hope you were enlightened at the end of it, James.
Yeah, enlightened. Well, I mean, I already thought I knew the extent of your poor opinions, but now we've reached heights that, I didn't think were possible, so
this
congratulations.
Game brought out the worst in me, what can I say? So thank you so much. So next fortnight, finally we get to do my game. I need something to get the bad taste of this game out of my mouth. So
Lunar
there are
2.
a couple of games, Lunar 2. There are a couple of games that friends recommended to me that I was very interested in. I was tossing up between Splinter Cell, the original, and Hitman, the original. Both games with kind of stealth sort of aspects that I've dabbled casually in without being super big into either franchise. So I did an impromptu poll on our Discord server, 12 hours ago. I didn't give them much time to respond. And the overwhelming consensus was for Hitman. So we will be playing the original Hitman. I think it's called Hitman Codename 47 or Agent 47, the one that released in 2000. So I'm very interested to see, because I highly doubt it has the dynamic options to assassinate baddies that the later game has.
Yeah, I'm kind of interested too. I basically don't have any experience with the series, but I'd actually always been interested in it because a friend of mine used to own I think it was Hitman Blood Money, and he spoke very highly of it as when we were growing up. So I always wanted to dive into the series, but never really had that opportunity. So I'm looking forward to it. I probably won't like it as much as the great game that Lunar was, but we'll see.
I'm just looking forward to anything that isn't a fucking JRPG, man. Oh my god. But anyway, enough of that. The episode's done. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you next fortnight.
See ya.